In the early hours of February 28, 2026, the night sky over Iran turned into a canvas of fire. Waves of American and Israeli aircraft sliced through the darkness, their trails followed by the silent, deadly approach of cruise missiles launched from ships and submarines hidden in the surrounding seas. The initial targets were precise: radars, air defense sites, missile bases, and crucial command centers. All were engulfed in a massive, coordinated first strike. Within hours, explosions lit up cities across the country, turning the pre-dawn quiet into chaos. Iranian officials quickly appeared on state television condemning what they called cowardly aggression. Meanwhile, in Washington and Tel Aviv, leaders addressed their nations and the world, justifying the attack as a necessary, decisive blow to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear-armed power. Global news channels immediately went into overdrive, broadcasting dramatic footage under a single, urgent question: is this the beginning of a major regional war? In this documentary, we're going to travel back to that pivotal moment. We'll explore the secret intelligence, the high-stakes decisions, and the critical events that led the world to the brink. What really happened in the days and hours before the strike? Join us as we uncover the story behind the attack that changed the Middle East forever. Before we dive deeper, a quick note: this is just the first episode in a full series about the wars that shaped the modern Middle East. If you want more clear, cinematic explanations of today's conflicts, take a second now to subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a like. In the early 1950s, Iran was a constitutional monarchy under Shah Mohammad Reza, but real power was challenged by a popular prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, taking control from British hands. For Britain, this was a direct hit. For the United States, it raised fears Iran might drift toward the Soviet Union. In 1953, they organized Operation Ajax. The operation combined propaganda, political pressure, and support for street protests and military officers. Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah returned stronger. To Washington, this was success. American money, weapons, and advisors poured into Iran. Tehran became a showcase of Western-backed modernization. But for many Iranians, it was humiliation, a foreign-backed betrayal of their democracy and resources. This wound would return with vengeance decades later. By the 1970s, oil wealth transformed parts of Iran, but power remained concentrated. A secret police force, Savak, hunted this. A religious leader in exile gained influence, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. He denounced the Shah and America as a corrupting power. In 1978, protests erupted. Security forces responded with violence, but demonstrations grew. Strikes paralyzed the economy. By early 1979, the Shah fled. Khomeini returned to huge crowds. The monarchy collapsed. A new system emerged, the Islamic Republic. The US was now the great Satan, symbol of foreign interference. November 1979, Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran, taking 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days. For Americans, it was shock and humiliation. For Iran, proof they wouldn't bow to US pressure. Relations were broken on, never restored. The alliance of the 1950s was gone. In its place stood ideological hostility that would define decades to come. 1980. Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran, hoping to seize territory and stop revolutionary spread. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 brutal years. Hundreds of thousands died. Chemical weapons were used. cities were destroyed. The U.S. claimed neutrality but leaned toward Iraq. American intelligence helped Saddam contain Iran. 1988. USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing 290 civilians. Washington called it a mistake. Iran saw unforgivable crime. Iran built ties with Hezbollah militias in Iraq, Syria. The U.S. strengthened Saudi Arabia and Israel. By 1989, they rarely fought directly but collided through proxies in the shadows of other wars. 1990s, 2000s. Iran's nuclear program became the central issue. Iran claimed peaceful purposes. US's Riyadh feared weapons. Sanctions squeezed Iran's economy. UN inspectors found enrichment violations. 2002. George W. Bush called Iran part of the axis of evil. U.S. invasions of neighbors made Tehran fear regime change. Covert ops, cyber-ethics, scientist assassinations targeted Iran's program. 2015. Nuclear delimited Iran's program for sanctions relief. A brief hope. 2018. U.S. withdrew, reimposed harsh sanctions. Iran reduced compliance. Shadow war intensified. The dawn of the 2020s was a period of fragile hope and simmering tension in the Middle East. The world watched, holding its breath, as the complex relationship between global powers and Iran continued its unpredictable dance. 4 years, diplomatic channels had been tested, economic sanctions had been tightened and loosened, and proxy conflicts had flared across the region, from Yemen to Syria. Each incident, each statement, was a piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that was becoming increasingly difficult to solve peacefully. In the early part of the decade, the primary focus was on Iran's nuclear program. International agreements were in a state of flux, leading to a climate of deep mistrust. Intelligence agencies worldwide worked around the clock, trying to piece together the true extent of Iran's capabilities and intentions. Was their program purely for civilian energy, as they claimed, or was there a more covert military dimension? This question hung heavy in the air, influencing political decisions from Washington to Tehran and everywhere in between. The situation was far from simple. It wasn't just about nuclear ambitions. A web of geopolitical interests was at play. Regional rivalries, historic animosities, and the global thirst for oil all contributed to the growing friction. Small-scale incidents in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for global oil transport, would send shockwaves through the world's financial markets. A drone strike here, a cyber-attack Darich event, was a test of resolve. A calculated move in a high-stakes game of chess. By 2023, the rhetoric began to sharpen. Diplomatic overtures grew less frequent, replaced by public condemnations and veiled threats. The so-called shadow war escalated. This undeclared conflict played out in the digital realm, in the shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf, and through a network of allied militias across the Middle East. Sabotage of industrial facilities, disruptions to maritime traffic, and targeted attacks on key personnel became disturbingly common, though official responsibility was rarely claimed. Each side blamed the other, fueling a cycle of retaliation that pushed them further apart. The international community was divided. Some nations advocated for renewed dialogue and fearing the catastrophic consequences of a direct military confrontation. They argued that sanctions were hurting ordinary Iranian citizens and that diplomacy, however difficult, was the only viable path forward. Others, however, felt that a more forceful approach was necessary. They believed that Iran was acting as a destabilizing force and that its regional influence needed to be decisively curbed before it was too late. In 2024, a significant event shifted the landscape. A sophisticated cyberattack took down a large portion of the financial infrastructure of a key U.S. ally in the region. The attack was complex, bearing the hallmarks of a state-sponsored actor, while concrete proof was hard to come by in the murky world of cyber warfare. Intelligence reports quickly pointed towards groups with known links to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The targeted nation vowed a response, and its allies, including the United States, offered their full support. The line between the shadow war and open conflict was becoming perilously thin. This incident triggered a new wave of even tougher economic sanctions, designed to cripple Iran's ability to fund its military and proxy activities. The pressure on the Iranian economy was immense. Internally, this led to growing unrest and hardship for the population, but it also seemed to strengthen the resolve of the country's hardline leadership. They framed the sanctions as an act of economic warfare and rallied support by stoking nationalist sentiment. Instead of backing down, they appeared to double down. Throughout 2025, the tempo of incidents increased dramatically. Naval standoffs in the Gulf became a weekly occurrence. U.S. and allied naval vessels engaged in tense encounters with Iranian speedboats, often coming dangerously close to an exchange of fire. In Iraq and Syria, militia groups, allegedly backed by Iran, stepped up their attacks on bases hosting international forces. These were no longer minor provocations. They were becoming more lethal and audacious, resulting in casualties and drawing a more direct military response. The diplomatic framework that had once offered a glimmer of hope seemed to be completely broken. Emergency sessions at the United Nations ended in deadlock, with vetoes and walkouts paralyzing any meaningful action. The world was sliding towards a conflict that few wanted, but no one seemed to know how to stop. Military planners on all sides began updating contingency plans, and the deployment of assets to the region accelerated. Aircraft carriers, bomber wings, and advanced missile defense systems were repositioned. The message was clear. Patience was running out. The final catalyst came in early 2026. A coordinated, multi-pronged attack was launched against several major oil terminals in the Arabian Peninsula. The attacks, utilizing a swarm of advanced drones and cruise missiles, were devastatingly effective. Global oil production was slashed overnight, and prices skyrocketed, threatening to plunge the world into a severe economic recession. The sophistication of the assault was beyond the capabilities of any non-state group, and fragments of the weaponry recovered pointed directly to Iranian military hardware. For the United States and its allies, this was the red line. It was seen not just as an attack on their regional partners, but as a direct assault on the global economic system. The calls for a decisive military response became overwhelming. After a series of tense, high-level consultations and a final, fruitless ultimatum, demanding Iran dismantle its offensive missile capabilities and cease support for its proxies, the decision was made. In the pre-dawn hours of a spring day in 2026, the world awoke to news it had long feared. A massive, coordinated military strike was underway. The operation, codenamed Swift Retribution, was launched from air and sea. Cruise missiles fired from warships and submarines streaked across the sky, while stealth bombers, having flown thousands of miles, penetrated Iranian airspace. The initial targets were not cities or civilian infrastructure, but the core of Iran's military power. Air defense systems, command and control centers, missile launch sites, naval bases, and facilities associated with the Revolutionary Guard Corps were hit with precision-guided munitions. The goal was to surgically degrade Iran's ability to project power and retaliate to disarm rather than to occupy. The sky over Tehran and other major military hubs lit up with explosions and the frantic fire of anti-aircraft guns. The world watched on 24-hour news channels as grainy satellite images and unconfirmed reports painted a picture of a conflict that had finally erupted from the shadows into the open. The long, tense decade of brinkmanship, proxy wars, and cyber attacks had reached its violent climax. What would come next? A wider regional war, a long and bloody insurgency, or a forced return to the negotiating table from a position of weakness was a terrifyingly open question. The future of the Middle East, and perhaps the world, had been irrevocably altered in a matter of hours. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration of a complex issue valuable, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into global affairs. What happens now? The United States has made its objectives crystal clear from the outset. Washington seeks total destruction of Iran's offensive military capabilities. Every ballistic missile launcher, every drone factory, every underground centrifuge hall spinning weapons-grade uranium. The stated goal extends beyond hardware regime decapitation through precision strikes on Revolutionary Guard command chains, intelligence ministry HQs, and Basij militia mobilization centers across all 31 provinces. President Trump emphasized in his March 1st address that Iran will never possess a nuclear weapon on my watch. While Pentagon briefers detailed phase 2 objectives, complete aerial supremacy over the Persian Gulf, neutralization of IRGC Navy, fast attack boats threatening Hormuz, and systematic dismantling of Tehran's proxy infrastructure from Sana'a to Beirut. Defense Secretary statements confirm 47,000 additional troops deploying, be it one raiders standing alert, and carrier air wings burning through JDMs at rates unseen since Gulf War. Iran frames this existential assault differently. Tehran invokes defensive jihad against Crusader Zionist aggression, vowing asymmetric retaliation through its axis of resistance. The Islamic Republic claims sovereign right to nuclear energy, while Supreme Leader statements reject any negotiated surrender. State media broadcasts images of youth volunteering for martyrdom operations, speedboat swarms training in the Gulf, and mothballed F-14s wheeled from climate. History whispers caution through 7 decades of mutual miscalculation. The 1953 coup birthed enduring anti-Americanism. Vincent's 290 civilian deaths became Iranian Palm Sunday ritual. Soleimani's Baghdad airport drone strike radicalized a generation of commanders now leading retaliation planning. Each American victory, Ajax success, hostage rescue failure, tanker war dominance, Stuxnet sabotage manufactured Iranian martyrs and hardened resolve. The road to U.S.-Iran war continues. Subscribe now. Like if this explained today's headlines. Comment your biggest takeaway. Share with someone tracking this crisis. See you in the next chapter.